Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's been 40 years since the last upgrade of this facility, and that's way too long.
Major surgery, a $1.3 billion upgrade for Burnaby Hospital. Also, life in prison. A Surrey woman who killed her daughter despite her ex-husband learns her fate. And
one of the most contentious issues has definitely been class size and class composition.
Their teachers don't have a contract, but thousands of BC students are now back in school.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Anita is away tonight. A Surrey woman who killed her young daughter has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. Lisa Batstone suffocated 8-year-old Tegan in 2014 during a bitter custody dispute with her ex-husband. As Jason Proctor reports tonight, those circumstances played a key role in the judge's sentencing.
Justice Catherine Murray began Lisa Batstone's sentencing hearing today, saying it was obvious that Tegan's death had left a huge hole in the lives of people that loved her and that no sentence was going to bring her back. Lisa Batstone was convicted of second-degree murder, which comes with an automatic life sentence. The question for the court to consider was around the range of years before she would be able to apply for parole. Defense had asked for 10 years. The Crown had asked for 16 to 18 years. The judge found that the circumstances here were egregious enough that it warranted the higher range of parole ineligibility for 15 years. That's because Lisa Batstone committed the ultimate breach of trust for a parent, killing her child in order to spite her ex-husband, Gabe Batstone. The judge said that the court needed to send a clear message here to parents that their children cannot be used as pawns in matrimonial disputes. Lisa Batstone could be heard sobbing throughout the proceedings as the judge recounted the events. She stood up to receive her sentence. She won't be able to apply for parole for 15 years, and she was led away by sheriffs after to begin serving that sentence. Jason Proctor, CBC News, Vancouver.
And sentencing is underway for a man who killed another man with a single punch at a Burnaby Starbucks. Lawrence Sharp was convicted of manslaughter in the 2017 death of Michael Page Vincelli. Sharp punched the 22-year-old victim without warning after he had an argument with Sharp's girlfriend. Page Vincelli fell and hit his head on the floor. He later died in hospital. The Crown is asking for Sharp to be imprisoned for 2 to 3 years. Page Vincelli's mother says the proposed sentence is not nearly enough.
This guy, he gets 2 years and then he gets to go out and then live his life. What does Miss Lynn get? I get no more Christmases, no more Mother's Day, no more birthdays, nothing. It's going to be 25. My son would have been 25 this year, and I don't even get to spend it with him. How am I supposed to celebrate him? How am I supposed to? No marriage, no kids, no nothing. That's not fair. You're telling me a child's life worth more than 2 years? It's not fair.
Sharp will be sentenced in BC Supreme Court this Friday. A man living in BC who praised ISIS online years ago should be released. The Federal Court of Canada ruled that today after Othman Hamdan spent 4 years in detention. CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burratt joins us now live with more on this case. So Dan, where is he going to live?
Mike, he's set to live with a friend near Salmon Arm. The federal court says Othman Hamdan does not pose a danger to the public if he's released with appropriate conditions. He's a 38-year-old Jordanian citizen who was granted refugee protection here in 2004, and he's since lived in Fort St. John. 4 years ago, he was arrested after, you said, praising ISIS online and encouraging attacks on Canada. He was acquitted of any criminal charges, but right after, immigration officials held him, claiming he posed a danger to Canada's security. In early August, the Immigration Review Board ordered he be released on those strict conditions into the care of a friend. The federal government appealed, but today the federal court dismissed that appeal. Hamdan does have to live under 25 conditions, though. Here are just a few of them. He has to live with the person who posted his $2,000 bond. He also cannot drive, so his ability to get around is very limited. And he cannot access the internet at all. Hamdan is alleged to have advocated lone wolf attacks and praised ISIS in Facebook posts. Now, Hamdan essentially has nowhere to go, as experts agree his life is in danger if he's sent back to Jordan. Mike?
All right, Dan, thanks very much. Dan Burratt reporting live tonight. Well, call it major surgery for an aging hospital. The NDP government is spending $1.3 billion to redevelop Burnaby Hospital. As the CBC's Tina Lovegreen reports, it's been more than 40 years since the facility has had any upgrades.
The location won't change, but the Burnaby Hospital is getting a facelift.
$1.3 billion for 2 new patient care towers, new wards, new operating rooms, 400 new beds, the majority of which will be single patient beds, bigger emergency room, and most importantly, and why we've decided to keep the facility here, a new cancer treatment center to complement the great work we do here in BC.
And residents here are quick to tell you the news is long overdue.
I mean, look at this place, how old it is, you know? It needs big-time repairs.
It was an NDP election promise to invest more than $2 billion to build a new hospital here in Burnaby. And while the price tag is lower, any improvements is welcome news. Just ask staff.
It's very cramped. It's very challenging during the summer. There's no air conditioning in most of it. It's very hot.
The 67-year-old hospital has had its share of horror stories, with high rates of C. difficile infections, problems with overcrowded emergency rooms, and overworked nurses.
I had trouble accessing services. It took several months.
The redevelopment includes a new 6-story tower that will have 78 beds, a mental health and substance use inpatient unit, plus a new maternity ward. The second building will offer 160 new beds with a cancer treatment center.
This is a great day for Burnaby and a great day for our residents in this great city.
But the announcement has Surrey residents wondering, where is the second hospital the NDP promised to build in their city? The Premier says it's coming.
Still in the concept planning stages, but the Burnaby Hospital was well ahead in the queue of required improvements.
Those in the healthcare industry say the improvements are good news for the region.
The smaller hospitals don't always have full facilities, full equipment, full people to run the equipment, diagnostics, all of that. So I hope they put this money to good use.
Construction is set to begin in 2021. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Burnaby.
Students across our province went back to school today. While they returned to the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic, for administrators and teachers, there's some math to do. As Leanne Young reports, they have many equations still to work out.
Empty schoolyards came to life this morning, but going back to school wasn't exactly a stressful day for most.
All we did is we stayed in the gym and hanged out with old friends.
I went to the gym and then I went to old class and then I went back to the gym to wait for picking up.
Classes were only an hour long at most schools, leaving parents on duty for most of the day.
Oh, well, I'm glad they're back. Wish it were longer. 45 minutes, it's hard to understand if it's worthwhile, but I guess they just want to see who's coming back and who's moved on to other schools.
As teachers and administrative staff sort out the start of the school year, parents of younger kids are left with another question. Most don't know who their teachers will be yet for at least another week.
Like, there are things that you want to talk to the classroom teacher already, but then we don't really have a classroom teacher to go to. I think it'd be nice to know earlier, but I understand they need to figure out how the classrooms are going to look.
As families move in and out of communities, the president of the BC Teachers Federation says it's hard to predict where everyone will be.
It's really common. It's happened. I've taught for 20 years, and that's been the case for all that time that I've taught.
Uncertainty in the classroom and outside as well. BC's 43,000 public school teachers have been without a contract since June, and talks with the province have been suspended.
One of the most contentious issues has definitely been class size and class composition and specialist teachers. So we're a ways away apart on that.
Then there's also wages. Mooring says BC's teachers are the second lowest paid in the country, and they're having trouble attracting people to move to the province. There are 500 available teaching jobs right now. But the province's education minister says he is still hopeful.
Our government is negotiating with a number of other unions and successfully concluding deals, which gives me a lot of hope and optimism that we can do that.
Talks are set to resume September 23rd. It's a good thing because these kids don't want anything interfering with classes and, well, everything else. What's your favorite part of school?
Recess. Recess.
Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
And a road safety warning from police and the provincial government as the new school year gets underway. They're reminding drivers speed limits around schools are 30 kilometers an hour from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Drivers and cyclists are warned to yield to pedestrians and to stop for school buses with flashing lights. Pedestrians also warned to use crosswalks or cross from corner to corner.
Every year we have near misses at some school ground somewhere in the province, sometimes on a daily basis. And of course we have some tragedies that we could point to in recent years as well. And that's entirely avoidable if people improve their driving habits and be alert drivers in school zones.
And the dangers of texting and driving were also emphasized as police say distracted driving is still a problem. And the popularity of French immersion in BC keeps rising, but there are two big school districts bucking that trend. Almost 55,000 students, just under 10%, are enrolled in the program province-wide. Enrollment has grown steadily for 21 years. That's according to a new report from the organization Canadian Parents for French. Only Vancouver and Surrey had a dip in enrollment, but that was due to a lack of availability rather than a loss of interest. French immersion has been in BC schools for 50 years. Well, Hurricane Dorian is finally moving away from Grand Bahama Island tonight, but it is expected to continue lashing the region with dangerous winds and a life-threatening storm surge. Dorian first slammed into the Bahamas on Sunday as a Category 5 storm. It's believed almost half of the homes on Grand Bahama and Abaco are severely damaged or destroyed. Aid organizations say more than 60,000 people will need food and clean drinking water. Dorian is now a Category 2 storm as it slowly heads towards the U.S. East Coast. And Christy Clemenega is here. She's been following Hurricane Dorian closely. Christy?
Thanks, Mike. Well, still a lot to watch with this system as Hurricane Dorian continues to move up the Florida coast towards the northwest. It was moving very, very slowly, almost at a crawl, but things are starting to pick up and we will start to see the system moving a little bit faster. But this is a look at this afternoon's satellite and radar. You can still see quite a bit of rainfall, lightning, and of course, very, very strong wind speeds. Now, as we move over the next 48 hours, you are going to see the system still a Category 2 moving up towards Georgia and South Carolina, and then things really start to speed up. And based on our current modeling, it does look like we'll see this tracking all the way through Atlantic Canada and up towards Newfoundland, of course, weakening in strength by then. But that could mean by the weekend, a very heavy rainfall for Nova Scotia and up towards your Sunday into Newfoundland and Labrador. So it is going to be something to watch over the coming days because there is that potential for impact to Canada. Now, as you look at our temperatures a little closer to home, it's been a warm one out there across BC. Temperatures this afternoon near 29 degrees in the Kamloops area, even into Vancouver, a couple of degrees above seasonal. Fairly quiet in terms of our satellite and radar. A little bit of thunderstorm activity this afternoon into the lower mainland, but otherwise not a lot of activity. Now, overnight tonight, starting to see some clearing, and tomorrow on the way to some more sunshine. Here's a look at the next about 18 hours in the Vancouver area. By midnight, relatively clear. All that stormy weather will start to clear up. 18 degrees there. Temperatures dipping to about 16 degrees by 7 a.m., but that sunshine carrying on right through tomorrow. Winds relatively light as well. Temperatures jumping up to 24 degrees by tomorrow afternoon, so another day above seasonal, and it looks like that warm weather will just linger on. I'll have all those details coming up.
See you in a bit. Thanks, Christy. And just a reminder, you can watch this newscast and all of CBC's other content wherever you go by downloading the free CBC Gem app. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You can follow us on all platforms for extra content you won't see on TV. Well, could Britain be heading for an early general election? MPs defeat the Boris Johnson government in an attempt to pass a law designed to prevent a no-deal Brexit. And hi there, if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube during our 3-minute commercial break on television, some extra content for you now. It's the first of its kind in Canada, a new type of housing that many consider a model for living with Alzheimer's has opened in BC. Instead of keeping patients locked in institutions, this kinder, more compassionate model tries to recreate a village. And as we hear from the CBC's Estefania Duran, it comes with a hefty price tag.
It looks like any other village. A store, a hair salon, and a local cafe. But the 7-acre village is a first in Canada, specially designed to house 75 residents with dementia.
I learned about the small house or the greenhouse project in the United States where they had 8 to 10 people living in a normal house with people supporting them, and I thought, oh, well, we need to do that as well.
The village is completely fenced up, allowing residents to walk around freely. Something that this family member hopes will help her mother once she moves in.
I think that's going to be also really critical to encourage our mother to get out of just sitting somewhere, being bored most of the time, and getting out and doing things that she really enjoys.
Each home can accommodate about 12 patients. Base rates start at $7,300 a month.
If you look at previous models of care, they focus much more on a hospital-like setting, and when you think about it, nobody wants to live out the rest of their life in a hospital setting, so it's really bringing that home-like setting to the long-term care sector.
From arts and crafts to board games, residents have options to stay busy.
When we had our grand opening, which was the end of July, and we had over 1,000 people come through here just to see what we're doing, and I had well over a dozen people come up to me and say, "Can I give you a hug? Thank you."
Estefania Duran, CBC News, Langley.
Speaking of other big firsts, Canadian tennis player Bianca Andreescu has had a summer for the record books, and the 19-year-old made another big splash late last night at the U.S. Open in New York.
And that'll do it.
Andreescu's latest victory over American Taylor Townsend sends her into the quarterfinals. She is the first Canadian in more than 25 years to advance that far at this tournament. And it's the furthest she's gone at one of tennis's 4 Grand Slams. She will play tomorrow. Stay with us. We'll be right back with the latest on Hurricane Dorian in just a few seconds. Hurricane Dorian has been battering the Bahamas for days now, claiming at least 7 lives and leaving destruction in its wake. Tonight, we're getting our first look at the extent of the damage. The CBC's Stephen D'Souza is in the island country, where there is now a frantic attempt to help those who've survived.
The absolute destruction seen from above. Last week, Great Abaco Island was known as a sailor's paradise. Today, relief workers are using the word apocalyptic. This is a before and after. So much of the island suddenly submerged. Hurricane Dorian hit Abaco first on Sunday, the most powerful storm ever recorded in the Bahamas. The U.S. Coast Guard is using helicopters to get some of the injured out to Nassau.
People saying, I've lost everything. And the only thing, you could say, everything is going to be all right, and keep praying.
On Grand Bahama Island, neighbors are rescuing each other on jet skis and in boats.
These people are going out and pulling people from their houses, from the top of their houses, and saving their lives. Look, there's a little baby here, a boy, they're covering up and protecting.
At this point, they estimate hundreds more were still out there.
We Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
Dorian stalled over the island for hours, ripping it apart, and sending people scrambling up as water rushed into their homes. The fear today, rescuers will be too late for some.
We have persons trapped in the roof, and a lot of those individuals, we haven't been able to hear from them for the day, and we cannot get to them.
Over local radio, Bahamas National Emergency Management Agency urged people to hang on, telling them, "We haven't forgotten you." The United Nations and Red Cross estimate more than 60,000 Bahamians will need food and clean water. A big complication to getting aid in, this is the airport in Grand Bahama, under 2 meters of water.
CBC's Stephen D'Souza reporting tonight from the Bahamas. Now, Dorian continues to move towards the United States, but the storm is weakening. As the CBC's David Common reports, residents in Florida are now breathing a sigh of relief.
Dorian's punch had been feared for a week with dire warnings across Florida. Yet its actual arrival with less destructive force than first predicted became something of a curiosity.
Even with the storm center well off into the ocean, the enormous amount of storm surge from the winds and rain became apparent quite early in the day.
Enough to submerge some boats, crash others into rocks as wind gusts tore up the coast. But after days of anxious preparations, mandatory evacuations, and closures, the storm's shift meant the impact was not as feared.
A little bit frustrating, but we're very fortunate that we got out of here, or made out without any serious damage. I feel bad for the people in the Bahamas.
Luckily, the heaviest rain will be right along the center and to the right.
Georgia's coast is the next to feel Dorian, the Carolinas and Virginia before Friday, and so preparations in those states are now underway.
Do not try to ride it out. You're putting your life at risk. And you're also putting at risk the lives of first responders who may have to rescue you.
Authorities insist even with a storm offshore, one that's losing strength, danger still exists. Floridians, meanwhile, are just ready to see the end of it all. David Common, CBC News, Fort Pierce, Florida.
And people with friends and family right in Dorian's path are watching from right here in Canada. As Jamie Strachan shows us, they're now trying to help from afar.
You know, fingers are crossed.
Firefighter Andre DeVoe is in Toronto, but his mind is with his father and the rest of his family in the Bahamas. It's a helpless feeling.
And the Bahamas are in need right now, and I want to be there. I want to be on the ground helping.
He's doing what he can, volunteering with Canadian charity Global Medic, preparing emergency supplies. He's one of many Canadians pitching in. A few blocks away, Chris Ashton, who was born in the Bahamas, is raising money to buy supplies that he will drive down to Florida and then ship to the Bahamas.
All we can do right now is pray for them all and get down there as soon as we can to lend whatever hand we can.
That help is desperately needed. Canadian Tim Tibbetts, who owns a restaurant in the Bahamas, says the devastation is unfathomable.
It's all gone. I mean, if you can imagine a tsunami and a nuclear weapon going off in downtown Toronto.
Tibbetts found safety on higher ground, but he doesn't know if his house is still standing. 3 years ago, he lived through the devastation of Hurricane Matthew and knows recovery is long and hard.
All of your photos, your kids' things, everything's soaked, everything is ruined, everything you own is gone.
In the coming days, he will begin to assess the damage, starting with his house, and says it will be a long time until things return to normal, if they ever do. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Authorities in Southern California say the search for victims of a dive boat fire has now turned to a recovery. Divers are now focused on retrieving the victims seen inside the sunken vessel, as well as on the ocean floor.
Today, efforts will be made to stabilize the boat so that divers can safely enter it, search it, and recover additional victims.
The dive boat Conception became engulfed in flames early yesterday morning as 34 passengers slept below deck. 5 crew members escaped. It has been confirmed at least 25 people died. The Coast Guard is now trying to determine how the fire started. Well, today's the first day the Passenger Transportation Board is accepting applications from ride-hailing services. Edmonton-based ride-hailing company TapCar has announced it has applied to operate here. Coming up, why did it all take so long? Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Whoever provides services for people in Burnaby will be able to do it in a completely upgraded, modernized facility at this location.
Call it major surgery for Burnaby Hospital. The NDP government announcing a $1.3 billion upgrade and redevelopment for the aging facility. Also, it's life in prison for Lisa Batstone. The Surrey woman who killed her 8-year-old daughter to spite her ex-husband was sentenced this morning. The judge said the court needed to send a strong message to warring parents.
One of the most contentious issues has definitely been class size and class composition and specialist teachers. So we're a ways away apart on that.
BC teachers will be back at the bargaining table in a few weeks, but today they were back in their classrooms welcoming students for the new school year. Contract talks were put on pause last week. Edmonton-based ride-hailing company Tapcar has announced it has applied to operate here in BC. Today is the first day the Passenger Transportation Board is accepting applications from ride-hailing services. Unlike Uber and Lyft, which have expressed uncertainty about operating outside of the Lower Mainland and the surrounding region, Tapcar already has its sights set on Kelowna and Victoria. Ride-hailing services could be operating before Christmas. Still, many people wonder, why did it take so long? Well, in the latest two-part About Here story, Yute Lee takes a look at ride-hailing, taxis, and the business of getting you a ride.
It's 2 a.m. You're downtown, Granville Street. You're doing fine. Okay. You're very inebriated. Most importantly, you need to get home to Langley. So who do you call? Hey, Mom. Yeah. Okay, before we even get into Uber, I think we need to ask ourselves, do we have a problem here? Are the taxis all that bad? Well, try asking the people waiting up to 40 minutes for a taxi at the airport, or watch this video of a passenger being refused a ride because New Westminster is too far.
You don't want to drive me because it's too far? Too far, man. Right, because you're not going to make that much money? Yeah.
Or visit the Granville Strip and ask this guy, who was literally sprinting after a taxi because he's been trying to get home for over an hour. Yeah, this was painful to watch. Those are all compelling stories, but to me, that's not good enough. I want facts and figures, so here's an unnecessarily long explanation instead. The taxi industry in BC is tightly controlled by the provincial government, who sets a limit on the number of taxis that can exist. If you want to add more taxis, you need to apply for a license in a painful and somewhat arbitrary process where you basically have to be an economist and make the case for why the taxi industry needs more taxis. On top of that, other taxi companies, yes, your competition, can actually intervene and make the case for why you shouldn't get that license. Wow, I really need more backup actors. All that ultimately keeps the number of taxis in BC really low and the cost of taxis really high. We have some of the lowest taxis per capita rate in the country and pay some of the highest prices. There are also reports suggesting that our regulations have resulted in a taxi cab cartel, where a select group of insider companies regularly scheme to... Hey, what's going on? What's going on? Now, in fairness, that system is pretty common across the world, but in BC, it gets messier. On top of a provincial license, taxis here also need a city license. And the catch? They can only pick up customers in the city that they are licensed in. So a taxi driver licensed in the city of Vancouver can pick up someone from Vancouver and take them to Surrey, but they can't pick up anyone in Surrey, meaning that they have to drive all the way back to Vancouver for their next customer. Now that becomes a real issue in places like the Granville Strip. People come here from all over the Lower Mainland because, yay, nightclubs, and when they're all done, they probably want to take a taxi back home. Well, because only taxis licensed in Vancouver can pick up people here, those taxis are very reluctant to accept these customers. In fact, a survey by the Vancouver Taxi Association found that in 1 month, 21% of riders were refused service altogether. What the heck just happened there?
Why even have your lights on?
Yeah, did they turn the lights off just as you got to them? Okay. Issues like that in the taxi industry are why ride-hailing apps like Uber and Lyft have looked so appealing. For starters, their use of technology makes them a lot more convenient. A study in Australia found that passengers on average spent 4.5 minutes waiting for an Uber as opposed to 8 minutes for a taxi. By the way, in Vancouver, the average wait time for a taxi is 24 minutes. Come on.
But the key difference is that these companies usually don't have limits to the number of drivers they can hire, and no painful licensing process. So what that means is that their service can be much more available and, most importantly, much cheaper. In fact, a study found Uber to be 24 to 50% cheaper than taxis in cities across Canada. It sounds like a no-brainer, right? So why doesn't BC have Uber yet? Well, that's what I want to get into next time. I hope you stay tuned.
At 6:34 on this Tuesday evening that kind of feels a bit like a Monday, but it is Tuesday. Here's a live look at downtown Vancouver. Tonight, the sun is shining, and don't listen to what some people are saying. It's still summer, and we got the weather forecast to prove it. Next. And with the latest on rainfall amounts for the month of August and the latest on Dorian, here once again is Christy.
Thanks, Mike. Well, still a lot to watch with this system as Hurricane Dorian continues to move up the Florida coast towards the northwest. It was moving very, very slowly, almost at a crawl, but things are starting to pick up and we will start to see the system moving a little bit faster. But this is a look at this afternoon's satellite and radar. You can still see quite a bit of rainfall, lightning, and of course, very, very strong wind speeds. Now, as we move over the next 48 hours, you are going to see the system still a Category 2 moving up towards Georgia and South Carolina, and then things really start to speed up. And based on our current modeling, it does look like we'll see this tracking all the way through Atlantic Canada and up towards Newfoundland, of course, weakening in strength by then. But that could mean by the weekend, a very heavy rainfall for Nova Scotia and up towards your Sunday into Newfoundland and Labrador. So it is going to be something to watch over the coming days because there is that potential for impact to Canada. Now, as you look at our temperatures a little closer to home, it's been a warm one out there across BC. Temperatures this afternoon near 29 degrees in the Kamloops area, even into Vancouver, a couple of degrees above seasonal. Fairly quiet in terms of our satellite and radar. A little bit of thunderstorm activity this afternoon into the lower mainland, but otherwise not a lot of activity. Now, overnight tonight, starting to see some clearing, and tomorrow on the way to some more sunshine. Here's a look at the next about 18 hours in the Vancouver area. By midnight, relatively clear. All that stormy weather will start to clear up. 18 degrees there. Temperatures dipping to about 16 degrees by 7 a.m., but that sunshine carrying on right through tomorrow. Winds relatively light as well. Temperatures jumping up to 24 degrees by tomorrow afternoon, so another day above seasonal, and it looks like that warm weather will just linger on. I'll have all those details coming up.
All right, Christy, thanks very much. Well, the right to bear it all, or at least go topless, is a hot-button issue on Vancouver Island right now. It was raised after a woman was told she could be topless, or couldn't be topless, rather, in a yoga class. Jennifer Frisley says staff at Quantum Yoga said she could attend without a top since she had forgotten to bring something suitable. However, afterwards, the instructor told her some people felt it was distracting and she would have to cover up for future classes. Frisley says it's not fair that men are allowed to go shirtless while women are discouraged from doing the same.
The idea that it is the individual's responsibility to take responsibility for other people's attraction to them is dangerous and unjust and discriminatory. That if someone's attracted to me, the onus is on them to have restraint, to have self-control, and that's an expectation in society we have of adults.
Frisley says the instructor was very polite and doesn't have any issues with how it was first handled. So she's created a topless yoga group and hopes to partner with the studio for an all-female topless yoga class. British MPs have defeated the Boris Johnson government in an attempt to pass a law designed to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Coming up, could Britain be heading for an early general election?
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. CBC Vancouver is proud to sponsor Vancouver Foundation's On the Table. Bring together your friends, colleagues, or strangers over some good food and talk about what matters most to you. And did you know that September is Literacy Month in BC? Learn what you can do to celebrate literacy and enter the Put On Your Purple contest at dakota.ca. For more on these events, check us out online.
To the UK now, where today Britain's new Prime Minister got a brutal reality check. First, Boris Johnson lost his party's majority in Parliament. One of his MPs crossed the floor. Then other members of his own party helped the opposition take control of the agenda. Margaret Evans looks at where that leaves Britons and Brexit now.
Platform 7 quoted 40.
Spare a thought for the people of Britain. More than 3 years after that fateful Brexit referendum, they still don't know when, how, or even if they'll be leaving the European Union.
I don't think anyone really knows the answer, even the MP.
If you asked me yesterday, I would give a different answer than today. Currently, it looks like we're going a bit down the toilet.
Today's showdown in the British Parliament was hardly encouraging. This was the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's welcome after the end of the summer recess.
This is a government with no mandate, no morals, and as of today, no majority.
It was the Prime Minister's first appearance in the House since critics accused him of trying to force through a disorderly Brexit by suspending Parliament.
That's what they want, to force us to beg, to force us to beg for yet another pointless delay. Order.
But tonight, a cross-party alliance succeeded in wresting control of tomorrow's parliamentary agenda from Johnson's government, so they can table legislation aimed at stopping a no-deal Brexit.
The ayes to the right.
21 of Johnson's Conservative MPs rebelled against him, despite the cost, expulsion from the party. A sign of just how brutal the politics here has become.
Be under no illusion, no matter how this particular logjam in the Brexit saga unfolds, this is the new normal, a divided nation for the foreseeable future.
For an election.
Johnson's response to the Commons' defeat was to immediately threaten an election.
I don't want an election, but if MPs vote tomorrow to stop negotiations and to compel another pointless delay to Brexit, potentially for years, then that would be the only way to resolve this.
But he'll still need a two-thirds majority in Parliament to approve it.
Even if we were to get an election that were to allow Boris Johnson to take us out, the idea that that would be some kind of clean break is, of course, nonsense. We would still be stuck in this Brexit loop for years and years and years.
Spare a thought for the British people. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
To Hong Kong now, where protests continue with no sign that those in the streets are backing down. The CBC's Adrienne Arsenault is there and spoke to those on the front lines on their motivations and why they're not giving in.
The drive for Hong Kongers to keep doing this can be hard to comprehend from afar. But fear motivates, even if some of what they fear isn't always easy to see.
I try to count, to count the percentage of the...
Investigative journalist Cici Xing finds it, oddly enough, on the shelves of a university bookstore.
So what are you seeing when you look at this shelf here?
Look at the logo, JPC. There's like a door. They are all Sangmo, JPC, Zhonghua, JPC. They are all from Sino United.
And who owns Sino United?
Is not a simple questions, but the big boss behind that is the liaison office.
The Chinese government.
Yeah. You see, JPC,
She and her colleagues revealed that 30 publishing houses and more than half the bookstores in Hong Kong are now owned by the Chinese government, meaning it has real control over what is published, sold, and read, a grip that worries the protesters.
The publishing industry is far more important than like bank industry or other kind of industry because it affects who writes the history.
Subtle but serious, and in a way, so are they. These protesters look so calm, it's easy to be lulled into thinking maybe they're losing steam. Then something imperceptibly changes and the crowd shifts. Getting up, moving towards the gates to the central government. Police confronted by a tiny, furious woman. There's aggression, but no clear idea of what to do with it. The crowd taunts.
See what's happening over here? All the lasers being pointed at this officer standing just behind the line of the headquarters of the central government. The police keep saying to the protesters, stop doing this, we're warning you, stop shining the lights in our eyes and stop moving forward. So far, most of the protesters are listening. There's always a core group, though, who are mad enough to just keep moving forward.
So now what? A huddle to make a plan.
I listen to other people and follow their step. Yeah.
As fast as they advanced, some now leave, police in pursuit. Hong Kong changing with every charging step.
The CBC's Adrian Arsenault reporting tonight from Hong Kong. Well, Walmart has announced it will no longer sell handgun ammunition. The company is also asking customers to not carry firearms in its U.S. stores. Once the company runs out of its current inventory of ammunition, it'll make a complete exit from handgun sales. Moving forward, Walmart says it'll only sell hunting rifles and related ammunition. The move comes just days after a mass shooting claimed 7 lives in Odessa, Texas, as well as 2 other back-to-back shootings last month, one of them at a Walmart store. In Afghanistan, a suicide bombing is raising concerns about a peace deal with the Taliban. At least 16 were killed, another 119 injured, almost all of them local civilians. The Taliban says the attack last night was in response to raids by U.S. and Afghan forces. The U.S. has reached an agreement in principle with the Taliban to pull American troops out of Afghanistan, but a group of former U.S. ambassadors is expressing doubt the deal will lead to peace. They're warning of an outright civil war once troops leave. Well, as students head back to school, there is renewed concern about vaping. As Shannon Martin reports, a lot of parents say teenagers are getting their hands on vaping products despite being under the legal age to buy them.
It's the first day back to books and friends, and for some, bad habits like vaping.
It's not allowed in school, so people still do it. Like, people still bring it into school and do it
inside, mostly bathrooms.
How are they able to get away with that?
I mean, the teachers don't go in the bathrooms, that's why.
Easy to hide, and more are getting hooked. Vaping now surpasses cigarette smoking among teens. A recent Health Canada survey shows 23% of students in grades 7 to 12 have tried an e-cigarette.
It was a call from their school in middle school. Principal had contacted us because some kids, some girls specifically, had acquired vape kits. Some were getting kits from older siblings, but there was a guy illegally selling them on the school property, and the school got the police involved on that.
Jay Neville thought that'd be the end of it, but since then she's pulled 6 vape kits off her now 15-year-old daughter.
She said she's stopped vaping, but to me, that's one problem. The other problem is, how did she get this in the beginning, and how does she keep acquiring it?
Her daughter and other teens told CBC Toronto they're buying vapes on their own from neighborhood convenience stores and vape shops. No ID, no problem.
You could walk into any convenience store and purchase your own thing without them checking your ID.
Retailers caught selling vapor products to minors can face fines. Public health units inspect stores and investigate any complaints. Since 2018, Toronto Public Health has handed down 13 convictions, the region of Peel, 2, and Durham, just 1.
There has to be much more regulation.
This top Toronto cardiologist says the original claim that vaping can help smokers quit cigarettes is unproven. Almost all vaping products have nicotine, and that's dangerous, especially to teens.
Until we know they are entirely safe, which doesn't seem to be the case from what we know so far, there has to be advisory notices on the vaping products.
Health Canada says it's moving quickly to develop additional vaping regulations, including limiting advertising. When we could see those changes isn't known. Shannon Martin, CBC News, Toronto.
There is a cross-country effort underway to develop crops that can cope with climate change. As Nancy Russell reports tonight on Prince Edward Island, they're testing potatoes for the future.
There is lots to look at here at the Harrington Research Station. These potatoes have been harvested from the fields here and are on display for researchers and PEI potato growers, looking for varieties that will help them deal with changing weather conditions.
Ones that are more drought resistant. We have some varieties growing in our trial that have withstood the drought very well. We have some traditional varieties that have not handled the dry weather.
The Potato Board is conducting trials on potatoes close to being in widespread production. Harrington is also one of 8 sites across Canada, part of the National Potato Breeding Program of Agriculture Canada. These potatoes are still years away from being in farmers' fields, but are being studied carefully to see how they cope with the changing weather.
Well, with the climate change, you have to breed for varieties that are going to be able to adapt to those different climates. So we can see, because we do have our trials in 8 locations and the different provinces, the different climates that we have, the different weathering patterns.
Climate change is on the mind of many PEI potato growers, especially after last year's dry summer and then heavy rain and early freeze. Almost 7,000 acres were left unharvested across the island, something growers definitely don't want to repeat.
They're looking, I would say, particularly for varieties that have a shorter maturity, so ones that are get a good size, they could harvest early.
For PEI potato growers, the research at Harrington is of special interest because the trials are being conducted locally.
Trials that are being, the varieties that are being grown here in Prince Edward Island helps match our climate conditions that we have here.
The new varieties will also be tested to see how well they do in storage and their resistance to disease. Growers say they also have to look good, on top of being able to grow even with climate change. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Harrington.
Vancouver's unofficial ambassador hasn't been seen for 4 days now. Coming up, we'll tell you about the hefty reward now being offered for information on Canuck the Crow's whereabouts. Well, a $5,000 reward is now available to anyone who can provide information on the whereabouts of Vancouver's unofficial ambassador. Canuck the Crow has now been missing for 4 days.
He means the world to me. He's my best friend. He's my brother. It's just a unique situation where an animal and a human have become friends and still are. So I think people just like the idea of being able to sort of follow our life together.
Stephen Bergman, the Crow's self-described best friend, says there have been some reports of sightings, but nothing concrete so far. Canuck the Crow first became famous in our city for stealing a knife from a crime scene. Anyone with information can contact Bergman on Facebook or Instagram at Canuck and I. $5,000 reward. Just a reminder, you can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news right here at 11 with Dan Burritt after the National. Thanks for watching on this Tuesday night. Have a good night.